My name is Dr. Harland Bishop, age 72, a cardiologist who has opened more chests than I've opened birthday gifts. Hearts lie for no one. They squeal, whisper, thud the truth if you know how to listen. And mine, traitorous, overworked, stitched by colleagues I trained, started telling me a story I didn't want to hear. It began with breath that ran out before the staircase did, ankles swelling like punished fruit, and a hush inside my chest where medicine should have been singing. I told myself it was age. I told myself to accept the soft decline and let grace do its work. But there is a stubborn oath that medicine tattoos inside the ribcage. Never ignore what doesn't add up. My charts were clean, my regimen meticulous, my pillbox a regimented calendar of survival. Yet each week I shrank. Each night, the ceiling came lower. Each morning, the steps grew teeth. That's when the old reflexes woke up. I started reading my own EKGs like weather maps, tracing the rumor of ischemia in the curves. I knew what the data said, and it wasn't matching the promise of my medications. The pills I took should have been standing between me and the abyss like faithful sentries. Instead I felt unaccompanied at the cliff's edge. "Harland," said my reflection in the bathroom mirror, "you taught a generation to question. Question." I dried my face, opened the cabinet, and arranged the bottles beneath a yellow desk lamp like suspects in a quiet lineup. Everything looked right, seals clean, labels aligned, barcodes crisp. But any surgeon knows, a straight incision can hide a crooked intention. The cardboard tabs had that almost imperceptible fatigue of being opened and persuaded shut again. Glue pressed where factory heat should have kissed. A texture on the tablets that didn't feel like chemistry so much as craft. That night, the condo felt stranger than a hotel room with someone else's bags in it. My son, Evan, had insisted on handling all my refills after the heart attack. "I've got you," he'd said with a smile that had the polish of concern but not the weight. He'd attend dinners bearing pharmacy sacks and tidy my pillbox with the zeal of a convert. I had called it filial devotion. My heart, finally, called it theater. I slept poorly, my mind stitching timelines, invoices, and the faint indifference in my son's eyes whenever talk turned to money. At 5 a.m., as Atlanta's light began diluting the dark, I made a doctor's decision. Test, verify, trap. First I phoned Marin Cho, head pharmacist at St. Elijah's and a former resident who still calls me Chief. I asked her for a favor past the edge of friendship. A discreet analysis of 3 tablets from each bottle. The request tasted like betrayal on my tongue. What do you call a father who investigates his son? Alive, I decided. You call him alive. At noon, I held the pills in small plastic sleeves, feeling their useless weight. Marin took them with a careful nod, promising to call me as soon as the machines surrendered the truth. I walked home through a city that suddenly seemed to know my secret. Streetlights blinked like conspirators. The elevator's mirror gave me back a man I had met in operating rooms. Steady, cold, already grieving a diagnosis he suspected. If the pills were hollow, then something else was full. Someone's pockets, someone's plan. I poured tea, sat by the window and listened to my pulse. The beat was thin but stubborn. So was I. Marin called 2 days later, a dryness in her voice that no pharmacy humidity monitor could fix. "Harland, there's no active ingredient. Not in any of them. Binder. Dye. A perfect counterfeit of care." I felt my ribs become a cage for something feral, anger with a surgeon's logic sharpening its claws. If my drugs were theater props, then my decline was not a tragedy of age, it was sabotage with a calendar. I thanked her. I hung up. I didn't collapse. I cataloged. On my dining table, mahogany polished by Saturdays I no longer had, I laid out a war map, dates of refills, onset of new symptoms, Evan's visits, his sudden interest in being responsible, the exact mornings he'd arrived with grocery kindness and a paper bag of death. I added bank statements where he'd withdraw pharmacy cash, in flattering round numbers, never the erratic decimals of real receipts. The pattern was tidy the way crimes are when they're committed by someone who thinks love is a ladder to money. Grief came, yes, but like weather behind glass. The father in me wanted a softer explanation. A supplier he didn't know was crooked, a misunderstanding, a stumble. The doctor in me called the code. 3 months, synchronized symptoms, textbook progression of untreated cardiac disease. No one stumbles into that precision. I visited my cardiologist, Dr. Alana Reed, a woman a decade younger than my own residency class but old enough in the right ways, serious, thorough, allergic to lazy conclusions. I didn't tell her about Marin yet. I wanted to see the numbers misbehave on their own. They did. My BNP sketched a little mountain range. My EKG whispered old secrets louder. Alana frowned, then frowned again. "But you're taking everything on the list?" she asked, not accusing, just looking for the dropped stitch. "Religiously," I said, and the word burned. On the way home, I drove past condos I could have bought, restaurants where I could have wasted time, lives I could have lived if not for single-minded decades beneath surgical lamps. I'd chosen purpose, and poured its dividends into Evan's life without receipt. Schools that taught him polish, trips that taught him appetite, an SUV that taught him entitlement with leather trim. I remembered his 18-year-old hug the day we toured his first campus. I remembered his 32-year-old shrug the week another business of his drowned. A ledger, credits of love, debits of disappointment. That night, he came by with basil, tomatoes, and that rehearsed concern. "You look tired, Dad. Did you forget your afternoon dose?" I watched him refill my pillbox from a bottle he'd picked up on the way. My hands wanted to tremble, my training wouldn't let them. "I'm fine," I said. "Tell me, am I bleeding you dry?" His smile flickered, then settled. "What? Of course not. Don't be dramatic." He placed the white tablets in their little cells like a priest serving a cold communion. When he left, I opened the bottle gently, turned out 3 tablets, and placed them in a new plastic sleeve. I labeled it with date and time. Evidence isn't proof until it's curated. Sleep refused me. So I wrote. A log. A script. Not of a victim but of a meticulous witness. Every word steadied me, every timestamp restored spine. By dawn, a plan had shape, confirm the counterfeiting beyond doubt, trace the source, and ask a question in a room Evan couldn't control. But before any courtroom, there would be my living room. A stage I set, a recorder small as a matchbox, and a father who would turn listening into an intervention sharper than any scalpel. The recorder sat beneath a stack of journals on the coffee table, red LED hidden under the glossy face of a cardiology cover. I'd practiced the placement like a resident practices knots, toggling levels until the room's hush felt transcribable. My hands moved with old competence, tucking microphones, checking batteries, aligning chants to favor intent. This wasn't espionage. It was survival arranged with etiquette. Before Evan arrived, I rehearsed the conversation not as interrogation but as invitation, to overtalk, to contradict himself, to reveal motive in the negative space between words. I slow-cooked dinner the way he loved from childhood. Rosemary chicken, mashed potatoes, and greens that snap when your fork is honest. I dusted off the good scotch, not to celebrate but to lubricate a confession. He came smelling of expensive soap and impatience. "You look better," he said, an opener that sounded strangely like market research. "Maybe the meds are finally kicking in." I laughed like I used to with interns who misread films. "Maybe," I said. We ate, we traded small stories, the kind where nothing is at stake except tone. Then I placed 2 heavy glasses on the table and poured the amber that once marked Evan's milestones. He raised his, I didn't. "To many more years together," he offered. My throat tightened at the irony's neat handwriting. I nodded and set my glass down. "Which pharmacy do you prefer these days?" I asked, casual as weather. Alana mentioned counterfeits are more common now. He flinched so lightly he might have mistaken it for a blink. "I shop around," he said. "Wherever's cheapest." "Cheapest," I repeated, letting the word study him. "These are specialized drugs. Cheap usually means compromised." He stared through the glass as if answers were aging at the bottom. "They're fine, Dad. You worry too much." I let silence do the leaning. People hate empty rooms. They decorate them with truths they didn't intend to display. "You know," I said, "keeping me alive must be expensive. Bleeding you dry, maybe?" The phrase hung there like bait he'd already tasted. He swallowed, then the line snapped. "Every month is a fortune," he said too fast. The recorder caught the hinge where care swings into complaint. "I reimburse you to the cent," I replied softly. "Show me the receipts. I'll submit them. Medicare owes me a dance." He coughed a laugh. "Receipts? I don't keep that kind of... Look, I'll bring them next time." I changed the subject and watched relief flood his face as if I'd turned off a heat lamp. Soon he was texting someone in the kitchen about meeting tomorrow. He left early, a man who had been seen by the wrong light. When the door clicked shut, I pressed stop. The room exhaled. At midnight, Marin called with a second set of confirmations. Independent assay. Same verdict. Placebo perfection. I emailed her the new sample ID stickers. She replied with a short, human, "I'm sorry." Then I reached for another name, Detective Imani Cross, a patient's daughter whose card I'd kept because integrity is a network and someday you might need to borrow courage. I didn't tell her everything, only enough to ask a pointed question. If someone wanted counterfeit meds in this city, where would they go? She promised to ask around, no official report yet, just the whisper circuit that carries truth before paper knows its name. By dawn, my condo no longer felt like a stage. It felt like a lab. My grief, measured. My rage, distilled. My love, quarantined from denial. The father who had once believed money could fortify a child against the wolves now understood. Sometimes the wolf learns your door code. The next morning, Atlanta felt different, sharper, as if every building knew a truth I was still learning to carry. I woke before the sun, the way I used to before difficult surgeries. My hands felt steady, my breath deliberate. Betrayal has a way of sobering a man more effectively than any medicine ever could. At 8:12 a.m., Detective Imani Cross returned my call. Her voice always had the calm of someone who's walked through fire and learned its language. "Dr. Bishop," she said, "I spoke to someone who owes me a truth. Counterfeit medications this precise don't come from amateurs. They come from industrial presses, the kind professionals use when they decide ethics are optional. Do you know who's behind it?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "A man named Derek Miles. Former pharmaceutical chemist. Lost his license for tampering with oncology drugs. He's been operating a black market lab on the south side. Only sells to cash buyers." Cash buyers. Exactly like Evan. Imani continued, "He has a very specific client profile. People who want branded drugs without branded prices, or people who want someone dead quietly." She didn't say the last part lightly. Professionals never do. By noon, she'd arranged a quiet meet at a nondescript warehouse behind an abandoned print shop. I wasn't going inside, I only needed a visual confirmation. Surveillance 101. Gather what you can without touching the flame. From the parked car, I watched Miles step out. A tall, wiry man with the casual arrogance of someone who knows the law chases him but never quite catches. A younger man followed him. Hoodie. Baseball cap. Slight limp in the left foot. Evan's limp. Evan's posture. Evan's careless half-jog. My breath stopped in my throat. He handed Miles an envelope, thick, folded twice, and Miles handed him a white, unmarked bag, the exact size of a medication shipment. Evan didn't even check it. Trusting. Familiar. Routine. That was when the idea of forgiveness died. A father can absorb disrespect. A father can tolerate failures. A father can even survive disappointment. But a father cannot survive his son plotting the schedule of his death. Back home, I opened my notebook and wrote everything down. The time, location, vehicle plate, description, exchange behavior. My handwriting was old but steady, like a heart still stubbornly beating against its saboteur. Then I called attorney Mason Vale, a man built entirely out of pragmatism and litigation. When he picked up, I said, "Mason, I need to discuss attempted murder." He met me that afternoon in his glass-walled office overlooking Centennial Tower. The city below hummed with the indifference of traffic and commerce. "Dr. Bishop," he said, adjusting his glasses, "your evidence must be airtight. We need motive, method, and opportunity." "I have all three," I replied. He listened to my story without interrupting, without flinching. When I finished, he tapped the desk twice, a habit he'd developed during law school. "Your son did this for inheritance," he said quietly. "But we need him to reveal it in his own words." A confession, not screamed or forced, but spoken casually, thinking no one is listening. "I already have a partial recording," I said. "That's a start," Mason told me. "But we need him to confirm intent. Get him comfortable. Get him talking. The moment he slips, we lock the entire case." That night, alone in my condo, I looked at the trail my son had left. The counterfeit pills, the staged concern, the financial manipulation, and now the criminal supply chain. My heart may have been weakened, but my resolve wasn't. If Evan wanted my death to secure a future, then I would make sure my survival rewrote his future forever. Because now, I wasn't fighting as a father. I was fighting as a doctor. And doctors do not lose patience, especially when the patient is themselves. I prepared the dinner the way men prepare for duels. Slowly, deliberately, with an exactness that carries the weight of finality. The ribs roasted low, the garlic softened in butter, and the house filled with the kind of warmth Evan always associated with comfort. He thought comfort was a sign of safety. Tonight, it would be a stage for truth. The recorder sat exactly where it needed to be, hidden under a stack of old magazines beside Evan's usual seat on the couch. I tested it twice, pacing the room, asking imaginary questions into the air until I felt the acoustics hum with cooperation. Evan arrived right on time. He always did when food was involved. "Dad," he said, hugging me with the hollow pat of someone who lost the meaning of affection years ago. "Smells amazing in here." "It should," I replied. "It's your favorite." His eyes softened, the way they used to when he was a child. For a brief moment, I saw the boy who used to wait outside the hors d'oeuvres, pretending the surgeon's lounge was a spaceship. But shadows grow faster than boys do, and this one had grown into a man who calculated the expiry date of his own father. We ate, we talked, small talk, safe stories, meaningless threads. I let the evening breathe, let him settle into the full, stomach warmth that lowers defenses. When the plates were cleared, I poured 2 glasses of aged whiskey, older than Evan, almost older than the good parts of our relationship. I lifted my glass. "To your dedication," I said softly. For a split second, he looked almost proud. Then I placed the glass down and let silence fill the room like water filling a basin. "Evan," I began lightly, "I've been thinking. You've been so good with my medications. Maybe I should switch pharmacies. Dr. Reed is worried about counterfeits." He stiffened. Almost invisible. "But I've been reading bodies for 45 years. You don't miss the micro fractures." "What do you mean switch?" he asked. "Well," I continued, "I mean whoever you've been buying from. Maybe we should verify." He took a long, unnecessary sip of whiskey. "Dad, pharmacies are the same. You don't need to overcomplicate things." I leaned back, looking almost thoughtful. "But the costs, you said they're high. I should check what Medicare will reimburse. Hand me the receipts." His jaw tightened. His hand twitched. "I don't keep them, okay? Who keeps receipts? They're useless. They're tax deductions." He swallowed hard. "I'm not good with paperwork. You have a degree in business administration, Evan." The silence that followed wasn't a pause. It was a rupture. Then his mask cracked. "You know what?" he snapped. "The cost of keeping you alive is insane, Dad. Every month, I pay a fortune so you can stay breathing. You think that's easy for me?" There was. Caught. Recorded. I tilted my head. "You pay? With what money?" "I reimburse you every cent." His expression collapsed, panic followed by rapid rebuilding of lies. "I mean, general costs. Life is expensive, you're reading too much into." But it was too late. Intent had leaked out. And then, carelessly, cruelly, he gifted me the final piece. "Dad, honestly, sometimes I think it would have been easier if you hadn't survived the heart attack. We'd both have less stress." My breath left me. Not from weakness. From clarity. He had said it. He had shown it. He had delivered the final stitch in the pattern of murder. I smiled slowly, softly, as if he hadn't just confirmed he wanted me dead. "Evan," I said, "thank you for being honest." He didn't understand the meaning. Not yet. But he would. Very soon. It took 3 weeks for the machinery of justice to fully awaken, but when it did, it moved with the precision of a well-trained surgical team. Mason filed the petition, Imani provided the surveillance details, and Marin delivered her lab confirmation under oath. Every piece of evidence clicked into place like ribs closing after thoracic surgery. Evan was arrested at 6:40 a.m. on a cold Thursday, still in pajamas, barefoot on the porch. His voice cracked through the phone when he called me. "Dad, they're saying I tried to kill you. Tell them the truth. Fix this." I listened to him plead. But, "I can't fix what you intended," I said quietly. "The truth is already fixed." The line went dead. In the courtroom, he sat beside his lawyer looking like a scared child trapped in a man's clothing. His hair messy, his hands shaking, his knee bouncing uncontrollably. I watched him without hatred, only with a grief so ancient it felt bone deep. The prosecutor presented the case with a cold elegance. Counterfeit pills identical to the ones in my home. Evan's cash withdrawals matching Miles' transaction patterns. Surveillance placing him at the lab. Marin's forensic analysis. And then, the recording. When Evan's voice echoed through the speakers. "The cost of keeping you alive is insane, Dad. I don't keep receipts. Sometimes I think it would have been easier if you hadn't survived." I saw the jury flinch. I saw the judge's eyebrow rise. I saw Evan's face drain of color. His lawyer tried to argue stress, misunderstanding, taken out of context, but you cannot repaint a knife once it's been pulled from the wound. Then Evan took the stand. "Dad is old," he said, voice trembling. "He forgets things. Maybe he mixed up his own medications. Maybe he replaced the pills himself and panicked." The courtroom went still. Even I felt the air change. He wasn't just defending himself. He was accusing me. Calling me incompetent. Calling me mentally declining. Calling me a confused old man. It was then, not before, not during the betrayal, but in that moment, that the last filament connecting us broke. When the final arguments ended, the judge allowed me to speak. Just a few words. I walked slowly to the front, older, tired, but still with the spine of a surgeon who never abandoned a patient on the table. I turned to my son. "You dedicated months to ending my life," I said softly. "I dedicated decades to improving yours. Let justice decide whose work deserves to stand." Evan's face contorted, anger, fear, disbelief. When the verdict came, guilty of attempted murder, sentenced to 14 years, Evan collapsed onto the table, sobbing. He didn't cry because he lost a father. He cried because he lost the money he thought was already his. In the days that followed, silence became my companion. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of grief, but a cleaner, sharper one. A silence that lets a man re-examine the architecture of his life without flinching. I returned home and opened the drawer that held every document relating to my estate. Evan had hoped to inherit everything. The condo, my savings, my investments, my pension, my lifetime of careful planning. But betrayal has a way of transforming inheritance into purpose. So I rewrote my will. Every dollar, every asset, all of it, now funds the Bishop Life and Ethics Scholarship, a program for medical students from low-income families. Children who work 3 jobs to afford textbooks. Dreamers who want to heal. Future doctors who will save lives instead of taking them. Money Evan wanted to gain from my death will now save thousands of strangers long after I'm gone. Poetic justice. A father's final surgery. I informed the attorney. I signed the documents. I locked the safe. And I felt lighter. Months passed. My health stabilized. Real medication began doing its real work again. Dr. Reed said my improvement bordered on miraculous. I corrected her. It isn't a miracle. It's simply the truth being allowed to do its job. On a foggy morning in October, I visited the prison for the first and only time. Evan didn't know I was coming. When he appeared behind the thick glass, he looked smaller, like life had finally become heavier than his pride. "Why?" he whispered, eyes red. Why did you do this to me? I didn't, I replied gently. You did this to yourself. He slammed his fist against the glass. You took my future. I shook my head. No, Evan. I saved yours. If you had succeeded, if I had died, your conscience would have killed you long before the police ever could. He went quiet. And for the first time, his eyes dropped, not in fear, but in understanding. I loved you, I said. But loving you doesn't mean dying for your greed. I stood up. I turned away. I left without looking back. My future belonged to the living. My legacy belonged to the deserving. My heart, once weak, beat stronger than the day Evan tried to stop it. Because survival is not just a medical event. It is a declaration. A man can lose his son, but he must never lose his own dignity. If you felt this story in your heart, if betrayal, justice, and survival touched you, then please hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me, do you believe family should be forgiven, or should justice always come first? Your support helps me bring more real, emotional, life-changing stories to you. See you in the next one.